the summer. And I think it'll be clearer, but just to kind of plant the idea in your head as a kind of framework to start with. These pictures, by the way, these kinds of pictures are up in the slides that are posted. Okay, these kinds of technical drawings and stuff. Pictures of like my family and stuff are not, just because I can't do that. But this kind of, that kind of information is there. You don't have to turn it up. So the idea is that you can think about development as a trajectory where you start with reflexes, right? Like what was the main reflex Nina's showing here? Looking at eyes. That's a basic reflex that infants come with. There's lots of other ones. We're going to be talking about them next week. Those reflexes are automatic. Like what is a reflex? It's just automatically elicited in a particular context. You don't have any willfulness involved. You can even sometimes do these when you're sleeping. And we'll talk about that next week, what that sort of implies for their neurological and psychological origins. So you start with reflexes, and then she's coordinating those reflexes together. So the first thing is you just hold her in the right place, and her eyes are open, and she's awake, and she just naturally is staring at eyes. But then over time, those reflexes get coordinated together. They get sort of organized into a pattern of behaviors that you're using for a kind of coherent purpose, something you can do. We call it a skill, is a way to think about it. And here I'm heavily relying on one of my mentors in graduate school, Kurt Fisher. I really like his theory of development at Harvard Graduate School of Education. So if you want to read more on his stuff, you can go look. But the basic idea is that you're taking reflexes and you're building them together, or coordinating them, or integrating them into actions. So somebody just give me a sense, like how did we talk about Nina's behavior and what she can do compared to now what Dorothea can do, and how can you think about Dorothea as what she can do as being built out of what Nina can do over time?
It's adding complexity to and different, being able to layer as opposed to focusing on one thing at a time. So you're kind of building on that skill, making it more advanced, something that it's just more part of who you are developing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You are deep.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
I was going to say something about choice. That it's not simply a reflex that you do in your sleep or whatever, that
Yep,
as you
that's
get
something else.
older, I'm not saying that the second baby is making absolutely conscious
Well,
choices.
she may not
but
be
it's-
making a conscious choice.
But she doesn't always hold her mouth like that.
That's
and she
right.
doesn't always do this.
Right.
And so there's some volition in her actions.
Yep, some kind of volition or goal-directed behavior, is what we say. Mm-hmm.
Mimicry of different behaviors, so she's mimicking both her mouth, and you said that she's likely making sound as well.
Mm-hmm. 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 Which is kind of related to what Sarah was saying, right? You're kind of layering a lot of things on. Mm-hmm.
It has practice and repetition. So through the interactions and engagement, continuous practice or repetition of the same things,
Mhm.
develop
Mhm. So she's building them, but not just like randomly. She's actually building them in the context of certain kinds of social interactions. And probably she elicited something here. Like she was probably like looking at grandma and going, until grandma picked her up, right? So she's kind of like, hey, I want to do my thing. Like we can, that thing we do, without saying it or being consciously aware, she's kind of doing it, right?
I know that Piaget talks about that, the sensory motor stage, and from 0 to 2, they're exploring their ability to see, touch, and
That's
all
right.
those sorts of things. So it looks in the first picture, it's just really her ability to use her eyes, and now there's this new ability to use hands and start exploring their sensory motor skills.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Nina can use her hands in a reflexive way, but does not at the same time she's also doing something else sort of goal-directed, right? So if she's got her hand out, you can stick your finger there and she will go like this, right? But she can't do that at the same time as she's also concentrating, right? As she's also working on something else that she can just barely do, right? Barely hold on to, yeah.
I guess to build up off of her response, like coming with volition, maybe she gets some type of reinforcement, and like maybe she knows that if she waves her arms and like look at her grandma, then her grandma will pick her up and play with her. So.
Absolutely. So this is the kind of thing that really hurts neglected kids. They don't get that kind of social response. And those social responses can look really different in different cultural environments. Some cultural environments really encourage certain kinds of responding, right? And some encourage other kinds of responding. And like we see in the baby's video, right, the little baby in Nepal is left alone a lot, it looks like, right? But that baby's got a different way of dealing with things. I mean, he still has his time with his mom, but he doesn't ask and receive all the time the way that, you know, say, middle-class Caucasian American mothers generally do, right? So there's a lot of variation. But what I basically hear you saying is that means that the ways in which we learn to elicit and call up these skills and the goals that we have that are attached to those skills are socially contextualized, even from the very, very beginning. Yeah.
I was just thinking, so not so much in terms of him being neglected, John, but if there's a reduced amount of interaction at that stage, do we find at John's level the inability to articulate certain things?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. So reduced meaning really sort of absent, right? So there's different ways of interacting. Some people are super chatty and some people are a little more calm. They put their baby, you know, on their back looking over their shoulder and then they go about doing their stuff and the baby's just hanging out watching, you know, but they're still part of what people are doing, right? So you're gonna grow up with a different kind of kid, with different expectations for how the social world's gonna work. But those are within the range of human normal and healthy, right? But then there's the kid who gets left in his crib for 10 hours a day and nobody goes and visits him. That's not normal and healthy in any way. You end up with Romanian orphanage kids. Yeah. Yeah. Did we turn that on, by the way? Oh, so good, thank you. All right, so there we go. You get the basic idea. And we'll talk more about this next week and sort of look at what this looks like. But that's kind of the idea. And this is what we call a neo-Piagetian theory. So you were totally right, Mike.
Yes.
You were totally right to bring in that idea, right? This is really built from what Piaget saw. Only it's more dynamic, and we'll talk about that in a minute, than what Piaget thought. You have to start with something rigid, then scientists can come along and look at data and realize it doesn't have a space, and then you can adjust, and that's kind of what happened to Piaget's theory. And then we get all the way up through representations. I didn't put the representation on here. What was our representational level? The drawing. It was the drawing, like, Nora loves you. You know, like, there we go, we have it. That's it, right there. Nora loves you. One idea, okay? That's kind of, I can bring that idea into my head. So if you were to ask her at age 5, oh, what does that mean? What do you mean Nora loves you, right? What would she, well, okay, let's just say, if you ask, let's keep it even simpler, like, if you ask like a 3-year-old, you say, what's a mommy? Or a daddy, like, assuming they live with one, right? If they live with somebody else, then you'd ask, well, you know, what's a, fill in the primary caretaker, okay? What's a mommy? Someone who takes care of you. They actually, would a 3-year-old tell you that? No. What would a 3-year-old say?
Point to you.
Yeah, okay, very, very specific, right? You ask a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old, what's a mommy?
They might be able to talk about quality.
Someone who loves.
Someone who cooks for me and.
Yeah.
They're very.
No, they would even say the someone part. Would they say, they would probably say something like, she makes my lunch, and she helps me have my bath, and she reads my book, right? So things that you do with that person, but you don't have to have her in the room to be able to say like her, right? So that's kind of a representation based in actions. And then after that, you can get to a place where Nora kind of was by age 5 or 6, where you can say like, you know, an idea, and you can actually make it sort of separate from the actual action. So Nora's just standing there on a path, and the only way you know what's going on is by her words, right? She's doing something. That's kind of a mental idea, but that mental idea of loving is coming from all of her younger experiences being read to and fed and bathed and, you know, all the things that a daddy does or whatever, and that's what makes a daddy or a mommy or whatever it is, okay? Sort of makes sense? So you're building up your experiences, and from those you extract kind of, what really basically happens is you pull out the goal. That's how I think of it. So you start with very reflexive stuff that just happens indiscriminately in the context. You can trick it by going like that, right? Then you move to more goal-directed volitional action, as you said, which I think is a nice way to say it. Then from there, you start to actually pull out the goal so you can represent it as something unrelated to the actual action. Like when people first start to do this, what's the most major sign that somebody's pulling out and extracting that goal and can represent it? Language. Exactly, you can say, you know, me do ball, or whatever it is, right? Where you're actually got an idea in your head that I want to do it. I'm not doing it now yet because you're in my way, but I plan to, so please step aside, right? It means you've got an idea in your head, which is a whole set of actions for how you do whatever it is, play with this ball. And then together those things become a mental representation of the goals. That's how you kind of, I think, move from actions to representations.
I was just gonna say, when you're talking about representation, something that's really funny is my daughter, so when she was younger, and her language isn't great, we're working on that, but,
Yeah.
all Asian people were daddy, because her daddy is very Japanese looking, so she would call grandma daddy. Any Asian person she saw, she'd point to them and say daddy, and it was, embarrassing. I finally got her past that. But now any man who is fun and she likes is daddy. So they were trying to like break it apart, so they sort of like generalize all the representations
Yeah,
into.
does she live with her daddy?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So she just misunderstood what the word means.
Right, she just doesn't understand the word, she just thinks like all Asian people are daddy, right?
Mhm.
So like that means an Asian person, and now a daddy is someone who's fun and a guy. And old men are pa or grandpa, so it's just funny, she's just kind of like.
Mhm. Bilingual kids do that a lot, where they'll think, you know, men are people I speak Japanese with, and women are people I speak English with, or whatever, right? In a case like that, where they'll go around and start talking to a strange man in Japanese, because my daddy speaks Japanese, so that's how men do it. Right? Yeah, that's actually a common error.
My daughter actually does that too.
Oh, does she?
She points to all of the men and said daddy, and she points to all of the women and says mommy. And one time she points to an older lady and says grandma. And like now we're trying to teach her like, no, that's a man, that's a woman. And she's
Yeah. But she's kind of right, it's just she's got the wrong word. Like, it's possible that person could be a dad, right? You know what I mean? Yeah. So then from there, and we'll talk about this next week, you move into this, or in several weeks, you move into the idea of abstractions. This is a difficult distinction to make, but I think it's really important, especially since there's so many people in the class who are interested in college and young adult and adolescence, that as you move from single and complex ideas about sets of actions and their goals, here and now, right? Or in the future, but they're still actions with goals that are about some kind of context. And you move into sort of generalized qualities and intentions that undergird those actions and goals, right? Things like identity, right? Like, I'm a person who likes to play soccer, who's good at soccer, right? I'm athletic. That's the difference between a fourth grader and a 10th grader, okay? Or, yeah?
So does that mean that the idea of developing their own identity starts at the representational stage, but doesn't get fully developed until they're moved on to the ability
abstractions?
to more abstractions?
Yeah, so what it means is that identity is a cognitive construct. It's something that you build. It's an understanding of who you are. It's not just you being. And so it's built out of all your actions, and then when we really get to what we mean by identity, because identity is something sort of abstract inherently, that concept is not something you can explain to a second grader. You don't say, what's your identity? You say, what do you like to do, right? Who are your friends? Are you nice on the playground? Are you mean on the playground? Oh, you're nice on the playground. Oh, so you're a nice boy. Okay, right? So it's like how you are in a context. That is your identity. But over time, it becomes qualities of mind and qualities of character that transcend any context. They're the kind of way you tend to react. And then you strive to bring those qualities to whatever context you find yourself in. That's abstractions. Does that make sense? And we'll have lots more time on all that. And I'll show you like little poems and songs my kids have written, all the way up that where, especially where my daughter Nora sort of jumped from representation to abstraction in her writing. And it's very clear. And everybody always says, oh, that's abstraction. Then you get to a real abstraction and you think, oh, no, that's an abstraction, right? She's writing a poem about, it's titled something like, why not orange or something? And it's all about being happy instead of blue and sad, right? Orange is an abstract way of being across everything. It's not something you do right here, right now. Does that make sense?
How old is she now?
Now she's 12. She was hanging around with me all morning because she's so interested in this camp that we're teaching. You saw this, Mercier's going to run some stories on it, but we've got these low SES, first generation immigrant kids from all over the city, right? Their parents come from 12 different countries, so it's really pretty cool. We picked a really diverse group. And it's an NSF funded camp, so I can actually pay for the kids to come, I buy them lunch, I do all that kind of stuff with the money. And then they come and we're learning all this funky neuroscience. Today they did neuroimaging, they scanned each other, we scanned all their brains. And they found their way into neuroanatomy, and they realized how hard, it's really hard. And like one kid's like, I know all this already. Oh, no, I don't. But it was super fun, and we had a big discussion today about what it means to be smart, and you know, all those kinds of stuff that are filtered in, but they're just a fabulous group of high school kids, 10th to the 12th grade. And Nora's too young, but she loves it so much that I let her come and be part of it, and just sit there and see what she can learn. So I just said goodbye to her before class. Okay, so the basic idea is that you're moving like this through infancy, childhood, and adolescence. But one other point to kind of bring to this, which again we're going to revisit a lot, but I just want to kind of lay it on the table at the beginning, is that just because you're not an infant anymore doesn't mean you lose the reflexes. Just because you're not a child anymore doesn't mean you lose actions. And just because you're capable of abstraction doesn't mean you're always using it, right? So, in other words, what development really looks like is not moving from here to here to here to here, but the capability, when the situation is appropriate, to move up. So really what you're doing is building to your repertoire. So when you start, all you have is this. Your very best ability is to just look or just close your hand on somebody, right? But then, as you get more developed and you can start to make those reflexes into actions that are goal-driven, then your very best ability is to have complex sets of actions that you can engage with grandma, and you can go, ha, 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 right? When the situation's right, when grandma's there, when everything is, you know, you're in the mood, and you're not tired, and you don't have a poopy diaper, and all that stuff, you know, like, it's gotta be all just right, and then, when the stars align, you can maybe do it. And that's what development looks like, right? And representations is what you're hopefully becoming capable of. It's the place where you're working when you're in childhood. It's the edge of your cognitive developmental level. Very Vygotskian, right? Sort of this, what do you call it again? Zone of
proximal
right?
development.
Zone of proximal development. That's what this looks like as a developmental trajectory. Not that when you're a child, you think like this, you know? See what I'm saying? What it means is when you're a child, if you're typically developing, you're capable of thinking like this when you're really trying and you're in the mood and stuff is supporting you. Same thing with abstractions. And this was part of what the default mode paper was about, right? Part of being an abstract thinker is actually recognizing when a situation calls for that kind of abstraction and when it's a waste of effort, right? The example I like to use here is when I go shopping, right? I'm grocery shopping every Saturday. I go to Trader Joe's, wherever. I fill up my car with a bunch of stuff. I've got my kids running around the store getting stuff, right? We're buying stuff. I know I've got in mind like a list of stuff I need to get every week. Milk, bread, whatever. I've already read all the different breads. I know which one we like and is healthy and whatever, and we pick that. I don't stop and make an abstract like deliberation over the meaning of buying that bread. Okay? I act. Because if I sat there and like deliberated abstractly about everything I was buying, I would be there all day. But then sometimes I actually do stop and step back and think about abstractly what's the meaning of the thing I'm buying. Am I going to buy grapes from Chile when I live in Southern California and ours are about to be ripe? No, I don't think that's environmentally responsible because they're being shipped halfway around the world. If I just wait 2 weeks, we'll get some from right nearby and be supporting local farmers. This is not is not an ethical decision, like I'm overstating it, but you get what I'm saying? To buy these grapes, I'm going to wait on that, right? So what's a developed person, what a mature person or an educated person, is a person not who is capable of thinking here, can walk around with their head in the clouds all the time at this high level of abstraction, but is actually capable of noticing when actions have meaning that should be addressed. When you're getting so caught up in something, for example, that you're realizing that this feels like we're just all doing this together, but actually there's a lot of hatred behind this. Or actually there's other kinds of interpretations or inferences that I should be noticing right now that don't make me feel morally like this is right, or don't make me feel like at a high social level like this is like this is a good idea for the future, that kind of thing. Does that make sense? We're going to talk lots more about this, but I just kind of want to lay it out as a map. So it's not about being able to do this and doing this all the time. It's about being able to move up and down appropriately depending on the context. And part of that is being able to actually recognize contexts that call for certain kinds of thinking, that call for you to step back and say, that kid looks like she's just sitting at the lunch table when they're having lunch, it's fine. But I can notice that she actually might be lonely all by herself over there. She looks like she's listening to music, but actually maybe she's doing that because she doesn't have anybody to talk to, right? Those kinds of more inferential kinds of thinking, you bring that in and out over time, and being able to do that flexibly, that's what situated, mature, healthy development looks like. Not just being at a high level all the time, which is what we often think of in education. It's like, what is the, how well can you do something? Great, then you're at this level. See, Piaget kind of had that wrong, which, he laid out the foundations for this incredibly reliably, like the things that he described about how infants behave. Anybody doing infancy, you want to do like the A not B error and stuff, it's super cool. It's actually uncanny, it's so interesting that kids still do it, right? But they make these kinds of systematic errors. But what he didn't realize is that he thought this kind of logic would follow kids across every domain of their life. And he'd see like kids who could do it in math but not in social relationships, or could do it in, and so he couldn't understand that. He called it décollage. By the end of his life, he realized he had to name it because it just didn't work that everybody was in this logical stage all the way up, even though the stages had a lot of evidence. And then it became obvious that décollage was the rule, not the exception. And that's when these more dynamic theories of development started to emerge, like Kurt Fischer's and Howard Gardner's and people like that. Okay. I think that's it. Yes, so just a few sort of summing up, but I think these quotes are in the slides that are posted there, or some version of them. Just to kind of sum up in language, if this helps you see it, skills are organized around emotion and cognition. And so that's kind of what we've been leading up to, and this is just sort of saying it. Now I've showed you in pictures and we've kind of discovered it, but that's, so what we mean by that is you elicit these behaviors in goal-directed ways. That's what a skill is. The goal is something that's fundamentally emotional. You need or want to accomplish something, like chit-chat with your grandma, or like build the blocks, or whatever it is you want to do. And skills grow in the context of social relationships. And I take a very Vygotskian view of what I mean by social relationships. It doesn't just mean like when I'm talking to my friend. It can also be in your own mind, but it's in a cultural context. It's in light of the things that we value as a society. It's in light of the things that we find beautiful or good or worthwhile or worthy of praise. These kinds of ideas are incorporated into the goals that we set for ourselves. And when I say social relationships, that's what I broadly mean. I don't necessarily only mean when talking with another person. Make sense? And of course, the unit of skill, what it is you're actually working on, whether it's actions or reflexes or abstract thoughts, is coordinating, is developing over time. So the unit of skill that a young adult is working with, when they're really at a high level of support and they're trying hard and everything's working for them, is abstraction. You can't expect an infant to accomplish abstraction. These ideas, we're going to come back to these, but I just want to sort of lay them out. This is another way to see it. Whatever works for you. You don't have to love these diagrams, but sometimes people go, oh, that really worked for me. Okay, so that's why I'm putting them up here. Another way to think of it is each sort of skill or coordinated set of actions, however many are packed in there, depending on what developmental level you are, they're sort of being coordinated over time into these complex mental and physical structures, things you can do in the world. So you could think of this as, I can look at two dots. I can look at two dots and mirror my mouth at the person. I can look at two dots, mirror my mouth, vocalize, and wave my arm around, all in the service of playing with grandma. And then pretty soon you get all these ways you can play with grandma. That becomes a flexible structure of actions. Or you can do the same thing with ideas. I can think about me. I can think about me and my mommy. I can think about, I'm making this up on the fly here, but you get it. Me and my mommy. I can think about me and my mommy, and we love each other, and we have baths, and we read books, and all together. And then that's what a mommy is. We can do all these things, and all those things together make a mommy. And then from there you extract like motherliness, right, which is an abstraction when you get old enough, where you could have, a 70-year-old man who could be motherly, not because he's somebody's mother, but because of the kinds of psychological qualities that he has. Does that make sense? That's the basic framework. It's kind of useful, don't you think? I think it's useful. I mean, other people do this other ways, but what I really like about this is that it kind of incorporates Vygotskian ideas of context and social world and support and cultural appropriateness and sort of situated stuff. It also incorporates Bronfenbrenner's ideas of situated cognition, because the way in which these things are supported and scaffolded and organized is really built in from the bottom around the structures of the society around you at various levels. And then also it's very Piagetian. You're constructing knowledge over time, but unlike Piaget, it actually takes into account these kinds of more dynamic social support kinds of structures. Did you realize that, a lot of people don't realize this, that Piaget and Vygotsky were contemporaries, and that they completely disagreed with each other. They thought their theories were totally incompatible, and there are this famous series of debates where they argued with each other about how development was. And so then, Kurt Fischer came along decades later and actually unified the two theories together, and other neo-Piagetian theories did that, but I think Kurt did it very well. Yeah, another way to say it, a complex unit of thought or action, a systems of smaller thoughts put together, two of them, or just a single thing you can do. I can look at you, or I can think about loving somebody, that kind of thing. Like a nice example of this, developmentally, my daughter was, I'm going to give lots of examples from my own family, and you can too, and they just stay here, but my daughter was 2 in a few weeks. She was a real talker. She's the one who wrote Nora Loves You, right? But forgot the arms. Okay, that's Nora. But she was 2 in a few weeks, and we were sitting in the kitchen one day, and I was just like, having a cup of tea or something. I was kind of sad about something that was going on in my life. And, she was just playing around. I wasn't like weeping or anything. It must have just been sort of thoughtful. I'm having my tea, and I was just kind of, in my default mode, whatever. Didn't know it hadn't been discovered yet at that point, but nonetheless. And she's crawling on the floor, and playing. All of a sudden, she just comes over to me. She walks up to me. She grabbed my arm, which is like hanging down on the table. She grabbed my arm and she pulled it up to my to her face like this, and she's hugging it in, and she goes, "Mommy, don't worry, Mommy. Don't worry, Mommy. I really love you." And she said, "I really love you." And I was like, "Oh, thank you, Nora. That's very sweet. I love you too. And I'll take care of you." That's what she said. "Don't worry, Mommy. I'll take care of you." And I said, "Oh, well, thank you. No, I'll take care of you too." She said, "And Mommy, I really love you. I mean, I really love your arm, right? I really love your arm, right? I mean, very toddler, right? How much more context specific can you get than loving the body part of your mother that you are currently squeezing, right? That's what love is, okay? It's like, I really love you. I mean, I really love your arm, right? And then 2 years later, she was 4. She's a very sort of poetic kind of kid. And she was laying in bed one night, and I snuck by her door, and I was just listening to see if she was asleep. And out of the door comes this little whisper where she said, what did she say? She said, "Mommy, I love you more than I'm glad that there's daytime." Isn't that sweet? I mean, she's like, "Oh, wow." No, that's like, but, what's the difference? Is both of those things are built from a sort of biologically governed attachment to her, mom or dad or whatever. But at the same time, conceptually, she's made a complete leap from loving a body part, extremely concrete, here and now, action specific, to likening the feeling to something else she really enjoys and is thankful for, which would be like, it's not night all the time. Right? Okay. So the feelings develop, the emotions don't develop that much, is another way to say it. But the feelings, your ability to make meaning out of them, develop a lot. Unless you're that reviewer who says he gets really irritated reading about emotional feelings, because they're not real things to study. Okay. So there we go. This is just yet another way to map these two things onto each other, which we'll look at again. But you can sort of see this is a recurring cycle too, which is dynamic. People are moving around on it. When I'm grocery shopping, I'm down here, and then I climb up to here when I see the grapes, and then I go back down. Okay? So you can sort of think of these things as being actions coordinated together, then they become a representation. That representation built out of all these actions becomes a single mental unit that you can now manipulate around and build ideas out of. And we'll come back to this. I think that's true. Yeah, that's true. Okay. So are there any questions or thoughts so far? Okay, why don't we take just a super quick, maybe a 10-minute break, or just, bathroom break kind of thing, stretch your legs, get a drink of water. And we'll start again in 10 minutes And we'll move on to this video, which I think is a very interesting discussion starter about genetics and nature and nurture and all that.
You didn't think I was learning. Yeah, you?
Listen, you got my phone, please. I'm sorry.
I'm not making any.
Everything for you.
Huh?
Turn it on.